Hello, my name is Ian, and today we're talking about K. Özlem Alp's and Melda Özdemir's The Tradition of Presenting Gold Gifts After Giving Birth in Anatolia. I really like this article. I've taught it a number of times, but I also recognize I'm just going to start at the very beginning and say that I kind of wish this were organized in a better way. There is something, this is just a little side note, my editor mind is to me, one of the very, very few problems with the article is that it forefronts the idea of gold specifically, and then takes a very long time to talk about gold in this aspect of gift giving. So we're going to deal with that because I think its strengths are really, really fascinating, and I think the idea of what's happening in this article is incredibly important for an understanding of not simply customs around childbirth, but customs around rites of passage, and specifically the giving of gifts. Gifts are a commonplace at rites of passage. With a possible exception of things like funerals, gifts are typically part of the expectation. Gifts at childbirth, gifts at weddings. Obviously, we have birthday gifts, where birthday gifts are basically, the birthday gift is the birthday being a sort of a calendrical celebration that is really, it's an anniversary of the rite of passage of birth, and so kind of on that cusp. Gifts at betrothals, gifts, at retirement, and the gifts constitute this very strange interplay between they become this language of manifesting the relationship that people have with each other through the exchange of material goods. And one of the things that is important about the gift is that even though we now live in the 21st century and we understand value primarily in terms of its literal capitalist exchange value, that is not entirely the organizational principle of the giving of gifts. For one thing, the giving of gifts is typically in a form of exchange. And one of the points that they talk about at the very end of the article is this notion of reciprocity in gift giving. Because when one gives a gift, one doesn't give a gift with the expectation of return. That almost provides a kind of ulterior motive to it. And so that is not quite what one is thinking of. Rather, it is this notion of reciprocity. Reciprocity that gets manifested in the eventual return of gift. We are in some kind of gift-giving relationship. But it is about this mutuality of respect. And it gives me pause because as we're talking about this culture that is defined entirely in many ways by the authors themselves through hardship, through scarcity, through what happens when the culture, even if it might not necessarily be the same in contemporary modern day Turkey, which is where Anatolia is, but is certainly embedded in the cultural practices, circumstances of want, where does all this gold come from? And the idea that I think is, I wish they had brought it more into the body of it, is that the gold that is attached, the gold that constitutes much of the unit of exchange, if I want to be as crass as saying unit of exchange, is not hoarded. It is momentarily within one's household, having been brought in largely through this act of gift giving, with the idea that it will eventually go back, if not necessarily to that individual specifically, then throughout the community. So the idea that this value that is of something that is really only there because it holds value, it doesn't necessarily have too many practical purposes. It's not like land. It's a different area of unit of exchange. But it's also not quite a luxury good because it's embedded with power and meaning, and so it's not superfluous. But it is seen as a value in and of itself that then can be shaped. But it's a value that the community fundamentally shares through the idea of gift giving, which is kind of anathema to the rapacious capitalism in which we live in, where we sort of think of like almost that things flow and then get hoarded by the individual, instead of thinking of capital as a system, or money as a system in which both on practical but really in terms of on social purposes, the group commits itself to itself through individual exchanges. So gifts have that kind of function. Now, why do we have gifts at rite of passage? Well, one of the things that we are doing during the rite of passage is that we are reassuring those bonds, and we are reassuring the other that in this dangerous time, in this Van Genepian pivot, in this time of potential risk, where there is a disruption in terms of your status being changed, and in particularly when it comes to things like childbirth, there is genuine danger because there are things like child mortality or maternal death in the act of childbirth, or a whole host of possibilities. That at this fraught time, one of the things one wants to do is reaffirm the connections that exist within that, and we reaffirm it through the act of giving, with the expectation is not quite the right word, with the understanding that there is that the mutual bonds will at other times, when the rite of passage is being undergone by someone else, will be demonstrated through a similar act of giving gifts as well. So I really like the article because it first of all, even with its sort of organizational infelicities, it is talking about contemporary 21st century Turkey. It is recognizing that urbanization in contemporary Turkey is 50 or 60 years old, but that does have ramifications, that the what do they call it, the hegemonic masculinity of rural Anatolia is less prevalent, but there are still vestiges of it, clearly. 20th century, 21st century Turkey is officially a secular state, so there's the distinction between the religious observance of the wedding and the official bureaucratic observance and marking of, officially connecting two people through the contractual apparatus of the secular state. There's the recognition that despite it being a secular state, it has been an Islamic country for almost since the birth of Islam itself. So, 1,500 years, 1,400 years, and that is a frame. But a lot of these practices predate Islam itself, and it's one of those practices that seems to have been in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the area that we call the Middle East, so prevalent that it becomes incorporated into the Quran in the same analogous way to how jinns, aka genies, as part of pre-Islamic understanding of the supernatural, ends its way up into verses in the Quran as well. So one of the things, and they take a long time to describe it, and I think it is valuable, is this notion of the Nazir, the evil eye, where the evil eye is the eye of envy. It is something that one wards against. And how does one ward against it? In part by going back to classic Fraserian sympathetic magic, with like acting upon like. So many of the amulets are in the shape of eyes themselves, and they take time to demonstrate how this, using the dangerous thing against the dangerous thing, is part of warding off practices in general, warding off of a magical protective charms in general that are also manifested in childbirth. So they use the example of how the wolf as an element of danger, as being something that could attack both people but also flocks, and therefore are disruptive to the economy of a place. Then, therefore, the use of wolf imagery, the use of wolf's teeth as almost warnings to wolves, but also simultaneously taking the power of the wolf and folding it against itself. So I am protected by the very thing that makes that this dangerous thing is now that under normal circumstances could be against me. I now have it symbolically, or metonymically, or contagiously, or homeopathically in my control, and then I'm using it against it. And the evil eye is another thing. The evil eye is the eye of jealousy. The evil eye is the eye of envy, which would be destructive. So you take another eye, and blue in specifically, those are the blue eye, which is rare in Anatolia, and is therefore seen both as because it is rare, it is also something that among the population might be an enviable physical characteristic, and becomes associated furthermore with the idea of envy. So it is beautiful, therefore it itself engenders envy. And I'm not just throwing that in because of my beautiful blue eyes, but hey, when in Rome, or when in Anatolia. Flip that around, so you have the blue eye, and you see it painted on the sides of boats. You see blue eyes all over the Eastern Mediterranean as these as charms, because they are directed back. It's like, oh, you have an evil eye, I have my own evil eye, and that balances it out. But the thing about gold in particular is that gold also has a number of properties, one of which is reflectiveness, and reflection is another way of warding off the evil eye. So you have the use of mirrors as a common gift, and that is something that will that deflects. And so the fact that gold reflects as well, the fact that gold is bright, the fact that having gold is a source of envy because it has its established value, ironically becomes something that deflects the envious eye. And one of the things that is one might be envious of is the child himself, the healthy child. And we're dealing with a culture that is, even if it is less patriarchal in the 21st century, less hegemonic masculine, it is still at least grounded in the patriarchal preferencing of male children over female children. And so, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly with male babies, the eye amulet is attached. It's often gold, or it's gold because it has reflective properties. If it doesn't have the evil eye, it'll often have other charms on it as well, or strong symbols, particularly the name of Allah. So God's name is as in gold on it. And again, these might take place, or these might now be in the contemporary Anatolia, contemporary Turkey, in the cities as opposed to in the countryside. They might be purchased through similar economic systems. I mean, you would go to stores, you would go to artisans and so on. For all I know, you can go to Amazon.Turkey and be buying them there. But nevertheless, they are, however much they might be acquired through contemporary forms and within a contemporary marketplace, they are understood as operating not as these units of value, not as these sort of crass presentation of that capitalist system, but rather as an ongoing import, an ongoing important act in this establishment and this reestablishment and this reaffirmation of kinship, of relationship, of mutual respect, of mutual responsibility. I am helping you ward off the evil eye. I'm helping your child ward off the evil eye because your child is important to me. Important to me because my community is important to me, and a healthy person coming into my community is of fundamental value to me. That is not me only doing it because it's important to me, but I want you to know that that has that aspect. So it's not really until the end, the sort of last summing up, that they really sort of finally lay out the reasons for gold, but it's a nice sort of conclusion to the article. So the giving of gift of one of the benefits of gold is that it is a determined value. You recognize this inherently as a thing, and I'm sure we have been talking in this way that is suggesting that everyone is going on pure motives, and I think for the most part we can argue that everyone is more motivated by that than by other things, but it does become an opportunity for some kind of display, and that the giving of gold, and the giving not simply of gold, but perhaps a bigger piece of gold, is one of the things about the gift is, as much as it is about mutual respect, it is also an opportunity for someone to demonstrate largesse and status and affluence and so on. So not simply do we have gold as a standard unit of value, but it's like, hey, I can give your baby a whole bunch of gold. You know why? Because I got gold all over the place. So there is that. There is this, and it's not necessarily meant to be an oppressive form of me displaying my largesse. It shouldn't necessarily be understood as a comparison, but there is that kind of performative aspect to it as well. But just as importantly, it has to do with gold is delightful, gold is joyful, gold is bright, gold is shiny. So in addition to the shininess and the brightness having that function of warding off evil, it is a beautiful thing. It is a beautiful thing in and of itself, and we are participating in this beautiful thing by me sharing this aspect, this culturally granted, this culturally assumed beautiful thing with you. It has that sort of fixed value. We know that it is of import. By sharing this thing, it expresses that solidarity. Which again, sort of goes back to that sort of standard idea of gift giving. So there is a certain amount of article stretching in here. There's to me. I think it's important that they talk about the development of the evil eye. It's interesting towards the end where they sort of throw in a couple of paragraphs about, hey, this also takes place at weddings, and hey, this takes place at a couple of other moments in time. Not simply the where it's childbirth and first tooth and sort of all the things having to do with the child entering into it, but more like there are other occasions as well. I think that's important. On the other hand, I think you have a certain amount of article bloat there. But it is, I think, fundamentally of a piece with recognizing, let me rephrase that. The import, why I like this article and recommend it so much, is that it reaffirms that one of the key things about custom is, and particularly about the rite of passage, is this interplay between the individual and the group, where whether the group comprises the family, and there's certainly emphasis upon family members and key family members like the mother and the mother-in-law of the woman who has given birth as being important givers of gold, but the entire community, the entire extended community, that it is them giving pause and signaling the importance of this particular event, the importance of this particular transition at this particular time of someone going from unborn to born, which brings with it the very mercenary practical issues of health, of childbirth safety, and so on, while simultaneously, because each individual unit of gold fundamentally forms a unit of exchange that is meant to be in circulation. It is using the language of wealth, the language of the economy, to make a connection between the individual transaction if we want to use words like transaction, because it makes it sound like I'm talking about something that is transactional. But the individual transaction of this instance of exchange that is that uses economic value, that uses a thing that has crass commercial value as well, or crass market value, but uses a thing shaped in a particular way, but uses a thing that goes from that goes towards the individual, as simultaneously knowing that that is just one step in the larger cycle of interrelatedness, that larger cycle of the fluidity of value, where it is value that is about the economy, but it is more than that. It is the value of mutual obligation. It is the value of the group. So again, a rite of passage is focused on an individual as they move through various statuses within a group, but just as important is that the group recognizes this individual's movement, not simply to recognize that achievement and to ward off the dangers, to collectively ward off the dangers that might be brought to that person as they move through. But just as importantly, it's like, because we are reaffirming the groupness's status, we are reaffirming our sense of group and our continuity as group throughout this process. So I really like this article. I said there's organizational issues, but really it's more than anything, it's the as I was rereading it today and going through, and going to be making slides and all those sorts of things, I was like, well, when are they going to start talking about why gold? Because they talk about wolf teeth, and they talk about lead, and they talk about salt, and they talk about that herb, whose I highlighted, and now I can't remember the name, but I'm going to put it basically. I'm going to put a flash on a title right here with a herb. So get to gold at the very beginning. That's all I asked. But I think it's a wonderful article, and I think it will really help wrap your head around that all of our customary behavior has some kind of deep rationale behind it. It's manifested in peculiar, maybe even peculiar ways if you are not of that group. But if you dig down, these things, everything that arises in a custom, whether it's a calendar custom or in a rite of passage, it usually has some kind of symbolic aspect that is about the perpetuation of the whole, whether it is something that is being undergone by the whole or an individual moving through the whole. That's all I have to say. So, once more, my friends, my name is Ian. Today we have been talking about the tradition of presenting gold gifts after giving birth in Anatolia by, I really hope I've been pronouncing these names correctly, Özlem, Alp and Melda Özdemir. As ever, my friends, I wish you nothing but the best. Be well, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.